Hi, I'm Brick Aramella and I'm super excited because today I'm going to do a comparison between DJI Mavic 2 Pro and the DJI Mavic Air 2. Now, I don't know if you could tell in the first few clips of this video which drone was which. I mixed them together, mixed the clips, and if you couldn't tell the difference between both of these drones, you certainly will be able to by the end of this video because we're going to talk about the different characteristics, different styles, different settings of both of these drones. So we're going to get right into it. First of all, the Mavic Air 2. We're going to start with this drone because it's DJI's newest drone. Obviously, the advantage of having the Mavic Air 2 is that it's so portable. I mean, so is the Mavic 2 Pro, but this is even more portable. The main thing I didn't like about the Mavic Air 2 is the controller. It's just a lot bigger. So if we look at the Mavic Air 2 controller compared to the DJI Mavic 2 Pro controller, the Mavic 2 Pro just feels better. Okay, this one right here, this one just feels better. The Mavic Air 2, it just felt too big, not natural. And it could be that I just flown the Mavic 2 Pro a lot more. So for me, the Mavic 2 Pro just felt a little easier to fly, a little smoother. And again, I just am not fond of this controller. I don't mind having the screen up here. I use a tablet holder with it, but it just felt too big and not as comfortable in my hand. The Mavic 2 Pro with this grip right here and using the tablet holder, it just feels right. Now I don't have really big hands, so if you have really big hands, maybe the Mavic Air 2 controller will feel more natural, but for me, the size and the feel, the design, the Mavic 2 Pro controller, it just felt a lot better, a lot more natural, a lot easier to fly. Now, controllers aside, let's get into the drones. All right, so we're gonna start with the good qualities of the Mavic Air 2. So the things I really liked about the Mavic Air 2 were that it was really good from edge to edge. So the sharpness was much better than the Mavic 2 Pro from edge to edge. Now you can manipulate that with the Mavic 2 Pro by changing the aperture. However, with the Mavic Air 2, you can only shoot at f2.8. So for this entire video, I always shot at f2.8 just to make it a fair comparison side by side. But the Mavic Air 2 was sharp from edge to edge. It produced some amazing sun flare. Both these drones did. That's what I was really happy about. And the overall video quality looked really good. Now with that said, there were a few cons that I noticed right away that the Mavic 2 Pro does better, that this guy was having issues with. So one thing I've noticed that a lot of other people haven't noticed about the Mavic Air 2 is if you look closely, it's really over sharpened. So we can't adjust the sharpening in the DJI Fly app. With the DJI Go 4 app, you can, so that's a big advantage of having the Mavic 2 Pro. With the Mavic Air 2, to me, the footage looks a little too sharpened, and this creates some artifacting, and it just doesn't look as natural. And another thing that the Mavic Air 2 doesn't do quite as well is the fact that from the overexposed parts or where it's a little too bright in, like, let's say the sky, to where the shadows are, the overexposed parts don't maintain their color. So what I noticed was it looked fine in the shadows and the midtones, but then the sky was just overexposed in white, whereas in the same sort of properly exposed image, the Mavic 2 Pro maintained that blue sky. So maintaining the colors and the details in the overexposed or the higher exposed and bright areas with the Mavic Air 2, it kind of had difficulty with that. And I guess that's sort of be expected because the Mavic Air 2 has a smaller sensor than the Mavic 2 Pro. So that's one thing to be aware of. All right, so looking at the Mavic 2 Pro, this shot great in sun flare, so looking right into the sun, shooting into the sun, produced great sun flare just like the Mavic Air 2. So both of them are great shooting into the sun, which I often like to do, especially around golden hour, which you'll see in the video coming up. Now, one thing that really bothers me about the Mavic 2 Pro, especially since I shot at f2.8, is the fact that if you shoot wide open at f2.8, with the Mavic 2 Pro, you're gonna have really soft edges. So the edges of the Mavic 2 Pro, it really bothered me because it was so soft and the sharpness was fine in the center, but on the edges, it was really soft. Whereas I didn't see that with the Mavic Air 2. Now, you could change the aperture to about f4 or f5.6 and it's gonna look better on the edges with the Mavic 2 Pro. I'd say between f4 to f5.6 is a sweet spot. But again, because the Mavic Air 2 only shoots at f2.8, I kept it at f2.8 for both these drones just so it would be a fair comparison. So in this video you're about to watch, the settings I used where I shot in 4K at 24 frames per second because I wanted that nice cinematic look. And of course I kept my shutter speed double my frame rate, so I was shooting at 24 frames per second, so I used 1/50th of a second shutter speed. Now I shot with normal color profile for both of these in this upcoming video. Later in this video I changed the settings around, but we'll talk about that later. But for now I just use normal color. Just for this upcoming video, shot in h.264 and an aperture of f2.8. And I shot right before sunset, so I didn't have to use an ND filter. So this upcoming video, I used no filter. This is just the settings, auto white balance, and didn't change the contrast, saturation, or anything. So it's right out of the box. This is what you're gonna get. So let's get right into that video. All right, so that video was shot right before sunset, but in the next video, I'm gonna shoot a few hours before sunset, so the light's gonna be brighter. It's gonna be different shooting situations, both with the sun, both at a side angle with the sun, both into the sun, so you get to see a variety of different shots. And we're also gonna use a variety of different settings. So because it was brighter out, I needed to use ND filters. Now, for the Mavic Air 2, I use these filters that came with the combo. So it comes with 3 filters. The filters I have are ND 16, 64, and 256. I use the ND 16 filter. And one thing I noticed was that the Mavic 2 Pro is just brighter. So if we use the same exact settings, the exposure is brighter than the Mavic Air 2, which is obviously due to the sensor because I was shooting at f2.8 and f2.8. So I don't think it was because of the camera lens. I think it was due to the sensor being bigger and made differently. And I use these f-stop labs ND16 with the Mavic 2 Pro. Now I had to use these ND filters because we're shooting at f2.8, and like I said before, because the Mavic Air 2 only shoots at f2.8, you can't change the aperture. I wanted to make it a fair comparison, so I put f2.8 with the Mavic 2 Pro as well, and then used the ND filter to properly expose it, which was in most cases ND16. These aren't the greatest ND filters, but they do get the job done, and side by side, I don't think one had an advantage over the other. So ND filters really aren't gonna change the color or the look of the image too much. They're gonna make sure that you have the proper shutter speed, at least in this comparison for what I was doing. That was my purpose. So where you see the videos of these two drones side by side, you're gonna see the Mavic Air 2 I shot first with that and then with the Mavic 2 Pro right next to it. So it's gonna be labeled just like the original video, but I'm also gonna label D-Cine-like and D-Log-M. I shot with D-Log-M with the Mavic 2 Pro, which is a log mode, which is very flat color profile. and the D-Cine-like mode looked very similar to the D-Log M in the Mavic 2 Pro. So D-Cine-like is available with the Mavic Air 2, but it's not available with the Mavic 2 Pro. Now I've shot with D-Cine-like and it looks great on other drones just out of camera. So on the Phantom 4 Pro, on the Mavic Pro, and the Mavic 2 Zoom, you can use D-Cine-like and it's gonna look great right out of camera. However, that's not the case with the Mavic Air 2. Okay, the Mavic Air 2, it looks just too flat. So you're gonna have to color grade it or color correct it at least, and that's what I did. Now using a video codec of H.265 to shoot in D-Cine-like with the Mavic Air 2 and D-Log M with the Mavic 2 Pro, the footage looks similar, but the way you can adjust it is much different. Okay, you're gonna have much more leniency and freedom with the Mavic 2 Pro, and the Mavic Air 2 is already sharpened, so you're not gonna be able to sharpen it in post. It looks a little too sharpened in that D-Cine-like mode. It's just like shooting normal. Whereas the Mavic 2 Pro, it kind of flattens everything, including the sharpening. So you're gonna have to add sharpening in post-production, and it's gonna look better when you sharpen in post-production, whereas you can't add sharpening with the Mavic Air 2. So the Mavic 2 Pro shooting in D-Log is gonna be far superior to the Mavic Air 2 shooting in D-Cine-like, even though right out of the box they look very similar. And if you want to learn how to color grade your footage from both of these drones in D-Log and D-Cine-like mode, you're going to want to get my DJI Drone Pro course. You can access that in the links in the description below. It's the best DJI drone course on the internet, and I'll save you a ton of time and frustration, so you can check that out down below. So the only things I changed in this next video were the fact that when you see it very dull colors or flat colors, I shot in H.265 using D-Log M and using D-Cine-like mode. Otherwise, I just shot in normal mode. So normal mode, I just used H.264 and shot in normal color profile. As you'll see in the next video, when I shot in a real flat color profile with D-Log M and D-Cine-like mode, I then color grade it. So you can see the color grading going over it. So when you see that, you know what it is. Now, the other settings are the same: 4K, 24 frames per second, f2.8 at 1/50th of a second shutter speed. Auto white balance, and no changing of the contrast, sharpening, or saturation with the Mavic 2 Pro. Last thing I want to point out before we get into the video is that shooting with the Mavic Air 2 is that if you use the auto white balance, it seems to be warmer than the auto white balance from the Mavic 2 Pro. So you may need to use custom white balance, especially shooting during golden hour or around sunrise and sunset, because it just seems a little too warm. So you might want to make the Mavic Air 2 a little cooler. It's just going to look a little more natural. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And now let's get into the video. All right, so that's the Mavic 2 Pro, the Mavic Air 2. We saw them side by side. Was there something I didn't talk about or something you noticed in the video that I didn't mention? Leave it in the comment below. I reply to all my comments. And also, if you want to watch the drone footage only from these two drones side by side, you can click on the video over there. And if you want to save time and frustration and really master your Mavic, check out my DJI course right up there. I'm Breck Aramella, Drone Pilot Pro, and remember, fly like a pro.